Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us here at 4:30. Governor Evers' plan to reform the Department of Corrections and ultimately lead to the closure of the Green Bay Correctional Institution is not going to make it through the budget process. A procedural and partisan pause coming out of Madison makes the timeline for closing the overcrowded and overburdened prison even harder to nail down. On Tuesday, the State Building Commission failed to advance the governor's $4.1 billion capital projects proposal to the Joint Finance Committee. Now, his plans for the DOC were included in that proposal. The 8-member committee is comprised of Governor Evers, 2 Democrats, a citizen appointed by the governor, and 4 Republicans. The commission split their votes evenly, all 4 Republican members voting against. A partisan result, but not unexpected, even for proponents of closing down GBCI.
The governor proposes a budget, the state legislature says no, and they start from scratch. But it seems as though they take into account what the governor wants or the things that are important to them. However, both the Democrats and the Republicans have all said this place needs to be closed. So it's now it's the budget making season, and this is what happens in the state of Wisconsin.
All right, to learn more about what happened yesterday and what it means, we visit with someone who was in the room where it happened. And we welcome in State Senator Andre Jacques. He is on that State Building Commission that made that vote yesterday and not to recommend going forward. So just kind of explain this, because we see the headline, it looks like a headline grabber, but what does this mean in the overall arc of this project?
Sure. I think we've been trying to collaborate with the governor for some time, particularly on a more sensible prisons plan. I think you look at Department of Corrections, the governor's numbers just don't add up in terms of what the prison population is going to be as we look at the COVID backlog finally making its way through the court system. But the reality is what the vote was yesterday was really a vote to try to put $4 billion in bonding on the state's credit card, when we have a massive surplus that would be better served paying for one-time costs up front, but also looking at the governor's overall plan, which was really throwing everything in the kitchen sink into the budget. And sometimes you have to be the responsible adults in the room and say we're not going to be able to greenlight everything.
All right, so again, the $4.1 billion, that includes a lot of projects. It's not just the DOC plans that we've been talking about so much here, but we do want to focus on GBCI. I know one of your colleagues on the commission thought that there wasn't enough information shared back and forth between the governor. Senator Van Wanggaard said on Upfront last month after the plan came out that the governor's office actually had reached out to them before they put the plan there. So I guess, is it just not enough communication? Do you feel like you guys haven't had enough of a hand in crafting this proposal? What is the reluctance there?
Yeah, I think the governor hand-selected just a handful of colleagues to really let know that there was a plan that was being developed. But he did not consult with myself or the vast majority of my colleagues, and of course I'm one of the closest senators to the facility. Sure. And it's really something that on Building Commission for several years now I have been pushing for the governor and Department of Corrections to come together and put forward a plan for how we deal with just the crushing issues that we have with overcrowding in these facilities. I mean, it's been a tinderbox, and quite frankly, we have seen exactly what I predicted, which is a stream of story after story of, just horrific situations, unsafe situations for everybody in the correction system, officers and inmates alike.
This is something we talked about again when the plan came out with a number of people on this program. Everybody agrees what the finish line. It seems that everybody agrees what the finish line is, and that's closing this facility. Mm-hmm. It's how we get to that point. So what's the next step in this process now that it won't go to the Joint Finance Committee, which begins next week, and I think they will hear from Department of Corrections next week. What's the next step in advancing towards that finish line? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, we've got the regional listening sessions for Joint Finance. I'll certainly be there all day in Kaukauna on the 2nd of April here. But I think ultimately we have to see if the governor is willing to have any discussion at all, particularly where those numbers don't add up, where even corrections officials themselves have, privately or in some cases directly to their legislators, expressed concerns over some of the elements of the governor's plan. So, if he's willing to discuss at all, some changes to the proposed realignment, hopefully we can get to an agreement, because again, there's been no Republican input in terms of the plan. It's just been something that was presented to some of them, and quite frankly, I just woke up on a Sunday morning and saw that something that the governor and his former corrections secretary had said would never happen finally was going to come to be.
All right, so again, and that's that finish line, right? This is the first time that they had acknowledged that they had a plan in place to try and get there to close this facility. So when Republicans craft their budget, right, when the Republican-led legislature crafts their budget, do you believe that it will include something that will close GBCI and a timeline?
Oh, absolutely. But I think that we're going to have probably a more realistic time frame in terms of how we're going to get there, as well as a more realistic accounting of the actual number of inmates that we're going to have in the system.
Will that include building a new prison, which seems to be the line of demarcation here between the governor and the Republican-led legislature? He doesn't want to build a new facility. He says it's too expensive. Will your plan include, do you think, a new facility?
Well, I think certainly we're willing to pay cash up front, again, rather than put things on
You're
the credit
talking about
card.
the surplus.
Yeah, but I think in addition to that, I think the governor does propose adding units at a few different facilities.
Right, well, Pond, for example.
And again, if we can get there in terms of the actual population number, I think the realistic situation we're in right now is that the governor's numbers don't work. So we're going to try to find a way for make them do that.
All right, let's peel back the curtain a little bit. You've been actively involved in these kind of budget negotiations in the past. So this was step two, budget. The governor had his proposal that you guys did not advance this part of that budget. Step three, we know, Joint Finance Committee. How much back and forth will there be going forward? You're trying to get him to talk. How much will there eventually be by the time we start getting down to that deadline in the summer?
Yeah, I mean, I think with every budget, it's always a matter of at what time are people willing to be locked into a room with pizza and root beer, and
Deadlines spur action, right?
I'm always a fan of doing that earlier in the process. So, realistically, there's a lot of different moving parts. We don't really know where the governor is going to land in terms of accepting investments we'd like to make in areas like transportation and tax cuts as well. And of course, then there's issues like cost to continue for the Medicaid budget and things of that nature. So there's certainly a lot of issues that are kind of intertwined, but again, we're looking to have that dialogue with the governor, and hopefully he'll take us up on that offer soon.
Do you believe GBCI will be closed in the near future?
I sure hope so.
Do you believe it?
I don't.
I guess are you more confident now because finally it's been in at least a proposal, even though you've rejected that proposal, but it shows some willingness? Do you finally believe that we're on the right path?
I'm extremely encouraged. I don't believe anything until the ink is dry in terms of what comes out of Madison, but I do think that I was pleased that the governor seems to be willing to reconsider at least what his administration had said publicly before.
Senator Jacques, we thank you for the time.
Always a pleasure.